everyone, and welcome back to What Time Is It? The number one talk show where we share opinions about African culture, development, entertainment, and lifestyle. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Ntube Nane, and I am your host. So today we're going to be talking about 10 questions you should never ask someone you think is of African descent. Number one, are you from Africa? Now, in the previous video, I talked about Africa as a continent with 55 different countries. Therefore, asking someone, are they from Africa, just is a ridiculous question, basically. A more appropriate question would be to ask, where are you from? That way they can tell you, I'm from Cameroon, I'm from Ghana, I'm from Sierra Leone, Liberia, or whichever African country they are from. That said, let's move on to question number two, which you never ever want to ask someone who has identified that they're from the continent Africa. And this question is, what is your favorite African food? Now, because Africa is not a country, but it's a continent with many different countries, Africa actually has many different types of food. I did talk about that on my last video, so you may want to check it out. But basically, there's no food that runs throughout the continent of Africa. Now, we do use similar ingredients. We have similar recipes to make different foods. But of course, there's nothing as a favorite African food. You can ask, what is your favorite meal from your country? And have you tried any other foods from the other countries in Africa? But definitely do not ask, what is your favorite African food? Now, that said, let's move on to question number three, which is a question that I have been asked on multiple occasions since I came to the United States. And that question is, where did you learn how to speak English from? Now, not to sound disrespectful or I don't know the right word to use, but I think that's a very, very ridiculous question to ask anybody, because some African countries started speaking English before the United States was a colony. Now, English is a language that is originated from the British. So anybody from England knows that's the Queen's language, as it's generally referred to. Now, asking someone where they learned how to speak English, I think it's been disrespectful, not just to that person, but to the entire continent. Because most African countries either speak English or French or both. And I did talk about that on my last video, so you may want to check that out as well. So if you feel the need to compliment someone's English, just say, hey, your English sounds really good. That would be a more appropriate thing to do. But asking where they learned how to speak English from, because their English sounds so good, is basically implying that Africans don't speak proper English. And if anything, Africans do speak British English. The accents may sound different because of the influence of many other tribal languages that a typical African would speak or knows how to speak. But that doesn't mean the English is poor. So now that you know this, please never ever make that mistake of asking an African, where did you learn how to speak English from? Because it is rude and disrespectful. Now let's move on to question number four. Is Africa beautiful? I mean, that's a question that is very difficult for. I mean, it's not a big deal per se, but it's a question that when you ask someone, you're basically telling them to lie to you. Because number one, majority of people living in the African continent haven't traveled to other African countries as well. Now, if you're asking someone, is Africa beautiful, and they haven't traveled to all the 55 countries in Africa, I mean, of course, they would have to lie to you or have to explain to you that Africa is not a country, but it's a continent, which means they don't have an idea, you know. So I think a more appropriate question to ask somebody is your country in Africa beautiful? Would you recommend I visit this place? That way the person can tell you, oh yes, my country is very beautiful. They can name some touristic sites or whatever that the country offers. But asking that is Africa beautiful is an overgeneralized question. And I think we should refrain from doing that. Now, moving on to the next question, which is question number 5. When do you plan on going back? I know that most Africans who live in other continents in the world have come across this question on multiple occasions. And it's a question that it doesn't just speak racism, but it speaks ignorance to a certain degree. Because asking someone, do you plan on going back or when are you going back, is basically implying that you're not wanted here. And I believe people have the right to choose where they want to live and make a family. And that said, I just thought to point this out because every time I've been asked this question, it's made me feel like it didn't make me feel good. I really felt bad about that question. And sometimes I'll just smile and say, I don't know. Other times I'll just roll my eyes and be like, you know. But I think this is a question. If you have asked someone this question before, please apologize to them and refrain from asking this question ever again because it does speak some level of racism and discrimination. That said, let's move on to the next question, which is question number 6. Do people wear clothes in Africa? That's a very funny question. I put it on there because it's something to laugh at. Now, I know that the few people have asked, why would you think Africans don't wear clothes? Or we say, oh, we see these pictures of kids playing, they're naked, and blah, 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 blah. And it sort of makes sense. But the fact that you see kids looking joyful and their shirts off does not mean they don't wear clothes at all. Now, Africa is a tropical continent, and the weather is very beautiful. It's hot, very hot in some places. Therefore, these kids would take off their shirts because it's natural air conditioning. They just want to play and have fun without feeling so hot or sweating. And I mean, it's sad that some people actually use images like this to portray Africa as a very poor continent where children cannot even afford clothes and all of that stuff. And I think it is wrong. But just so you know, I did wear this particular outfit because this is an African print. Africans, of course, wear clothes. We have great designers with beautiful styles. You can look up any African design you would ever want to know about, and you should find that on Google. So now that you know, please never ask anyone if people in Africa wear clothes because it just makes you look ridiculous. So moving on to the next question, which is question number 7. Do you have lions and monkeys as pets? Now, guys, there's a reason why lions are kept in zoos. That's because they're dangerous. They can eat any and everything that comes in their way. And because of that, Africans are human beings too. Therefore, lions can eat them. Now, one thing that most people do not know is that there are people who live in countries in Africa who have never seen a lion, who have never even come close to one. Now, the same way people in the Western world pay and go to the zoo to look at lions is the same thing for most Africans. I know we see some videos or documentaries where people go into the savannah to look at these things. You see people who have tamed lions, but that only happens in some particular countries. And we don't have lions running around all over Africa. Some countries do not have lions. And even in the countries that have lions or tigers, elephants, and monkeys, these animals typically are found in particular regions of those countries. So it's very, very wrong to assume that because someone is from a country in Africa, they could have a lion as a pet. Or, I mean, monkeys I'll get, but you don't just find monkeys running around on trees everywhere in any country in Africa. You need to go into the forest to see them, So now that you know, please never ask anyone if they keep a lion as a pet because it's impossible. I don't think anyone can do that. Or do you have monkeys running around everywhere in your country? And that said, let's move on to the next question, which is question number 8. Question number 8 is a question that most of the ladies who are from the continent of Africa are very, very familiar with. And this is that your real hair? Now, I know that some people have even gone to the extent of wanting to touch the hair. Is this to make sure it's real or whatever? Please, that is not a good thing to do. That's a very disrespectful thing to do. Now, Africans would generally have kinky kind of hair, and because our hair is so beautiful, we can do many different things with it. For example, braid your hair. Right now, you can see I have braids on. They're called cornrows. That is my hair braided into cornrows. And sometimes we add extensions like I did. Now, I get it that people can get curious or want to know more about something they have no idea about. I think it's better to just compliment someone's hair if you really have to. If you really need to know about African hair and what the different textures and colors are, please Google it. But touching someone's hair or asking them, is that your real hair, is just, it's not a very nice thing to say to a person. So I just wanted to point that out in case you've been doing that, so that you should refrain from doing so in the future. And with that said, let's move on to the next question, which is question number 9. Now, question number 9 is one of those questions that people would typically ask you when they find out, oh, you just came from a country in Africa, you're schooling or you're working or whatever it is. And that question typically goes, how did you get here? Now, that's a very weird question to be asking in 2023. It was a weird question in 2019. It was a weird question in 1990, because I believe flying in an airplane has been the most common means of transportation in the world. Now, if you're asking someone, how did you get here? It implies they may have walked, or I don't know. You can't drive to America. You can't drive to Europe. You have to fly. So asking that question typically brings out the assumption that African countries do not have airplanes, which is a very weird thought for anyone to have in today's developed world. So if you have ever asked someone, how did they get to America, please, we do have planes in Africa. Some airlines like Air France, Brussels Airlines typically fly from Europe to Africa. And we do have Ethiopian Airlines that flies from Africa to Europe and America. And of course, every African country has their own airline. So you can look up the various airlines in the different African countries. Cameroon, for instance, has Cameco, which typically flies from one African country to the other, or internal flights in Cameroon. So African countries do not only have airplanes, but people take flights within the country. I know this question is a ridiculous and very funny question, and I had to point it out. So that said, we've come to the last question on this video, which is question number 10. And that question is it expensive to visit Africa? Now, because people have painted this picture of Africa as a very poor continent, some people usually are of the assumption that you may use $200 to visit Africa. No. A ticket to Africa is very, very expensive. Airbnbs, hotels are almost at the standards of American hotels. So if you're paying a typical hotel for $80 a night, $120 a night in America, if you go to any African country, you're going to meet a hotel of the same standard for almost the same price, or even a little bit more expensive than what you would get in America or Europe or wherever you're from. So asking if it's expensive to visit Africa, again, paints a picture of Africa as a country. Now, you can ask if it's expensive to visit Cameroon. You can ask if it's expensive to visit Rwanda or South Africa. And different countries have different dynamics. So, of course, the prices would vary from country to country. But all of this information can typically be found online, and you can always look it up in order to make a decision as to which African country or countries you'd like to visit. But yes, it is expensive. You should never think that it is cheap. And please refrain from asking this question. A more appropriate question would be, how expensive is it to visit a country in Africa? For someone who has traveled, they can give you a rough estimate, but the best thing to do would be to just go on Google and look up hotels and whatever attractions you'd like to visit based on what country you're going to. That said, we've come to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your patience so far. And remember, sharing is caring and knowledge is power. Therefore, sharing knowledge is caring powerfully. So do not forget to like and share this video. And as always, you've been watching What Time Is It? Thank you.